Hello students, your Professor Dr. Mink, and I'm creating this short video to help further explain the major components of a function that returns a value. I understand this is a very significant departure from the way we were doing things through Chapter 3, and it is the way we will do things for the rest of this course and most likely the rest of your programming experiences at the college. So it's critical that you understand this. So here is, this is actually my programming lab assignment, and I don't mind using it to illustrate this. We want a function that returns an integer, which is the largest of three integers passed to the function and its three formal parameters, which are all integers. So I've set up a little driver program to test it. I've got integers x, y, and z representing the three integers that'll be passed, and max, which will be the maximum, the largest of the three. We're going to prompt the user to enter three integers, and we'll initialize x, y, and z. And then we'll assign, and this is what's called a stub. I'm just putting a number here now. But we're going to replace that 99 with the function call that will actually calculate the largest of x, y, and z. So we're going to put our function declaration up here, our function definition down here, and then the function call will go right here. So let's get started. I know the function returns an int. Okay? So there's its return type. I'm going to call it max of 3. That's just a name I'm giving it. It's a user-defined name. And I know that it has three formal parameters that are all ints. So I'll call it int par1, formal parameter 1, int par2, int. Now, don't get too hung up on this, but these are just names that I selected for these formal parameters, which become local variables in the function's definition. Notice the declaration ends with a semicolon. This is the declaration of this function. Once you have an appropriate syntax for a full declaration, you'll notice that the green squiggly line appears under the name. And it tells you the function definition of max of 3 ints is not found. It recognizes that as a function declaration. If I click on this little screwdriver, I can create the definition of max of 3 ints in the function, in the project. So there's our prototype, and notice the difference between the definition and the declaration is that it has a body instead of the semicolon. Return 0 is just simply a placeholder. So this is, and there's multiple ways that you could define this function. And that, my friends, is abstraction. As long as the function works and returns the larger of the three values passed to int par1, int par2, and int par3, you're fine. So let's do this. In my implementation, I'm going to declare a local variable called max. Let's give it a name that's not duplicated in main, max value. And I'm going to set max value to int par1 just to get started. So I'm going to assume that the first value, x, which was passed to int par1, is the largest. Okay? So if int par2 is greater than or equal to max value, we'll set max value to int par2. If not, max value will continue holding the value of int par1. Now I'm going to cheat here, and I'm going to put another if, right? Then if int par3 is greater than max value, we're going to set max value to int par3. And at the end, max value will hold the largest of the three. So I'm just going to return max value. This is an important part. This function is going to return the value of max value, and that will replace the function call. So right here, instead of 99, I'm going to call the function max of 3 ints. Okay, it tells me that I got to pass an integer to int par1. Well, I'm going to pass the value in variable x, and then I'm going to pass the value in y and the value in z to that function. And then this will pass x to int par1, the value of y to int par2, and the value in z to int par3. This is new memory. We're not taking x and passing x. We're taking the value in x, passing it to int par1. So in other words, excuse me, during the function call, this becomes int par1 equals whatever the value in max is. Int par2 equals whatever the value in y is. Int par3 equals whatever the value in z is. Notice I have a breakpoint here. Let's save this and run this. So I'll enter 3 integers, 23, 45, and 12. So obviously 23 is going to be used to initialize x, 45 y, 12 z. Okay, and if I check my local variables, there we go. We are still in main at a breakpoint, and I'm now going to step into, using F11 or the step into menu, I'm going to step into the function call. So we're in main. Now for the first time, keep an eye on our variables. We're going to leave main. Okay? Int par1 was initialized with the value in x, not x, the value in x. Int par2, formal parameter, got the value of y. Int par3 got the value of z. Max value is yet to be initialized. Step in. Max value is going to be set to the first formal parameters value, just to get started for comparison. So we start off with max value is 23. If int par2 is greater than or equal to 23, it is, then we're going to assign max value 23. If int par3, 12, is greater than or equal to max value, it's not. So we'll skip that. And in the end, we have max value holds the highest or the largest of those three. Now here's the magical part. When we return max value, the function definition ends. Where does that bring us? Back here. Okay, and it tells us max of 3 ints return 45. If you're not using breakpoints and step into, you're just killing yourself right now. You got to use these tools. If you need help, come see me. But you absolutely positively have to be using breakpoints. You have to be looking at your local variables. There's no way to see the inner workings of your program if you're not using those tools at this point in time. And if you're not, stop what you're doing right now. Come see me during my next office hours. Email me. Whatever you have to do, you have to be using breakpoints and you have to be looking at your local variables in order for this course to make any sense, especially at this juncture. So I just returned the max of those 3 ints. That value replaces the function call, which is what I have highlighted. The function call is then that value, it's like an expression being resolved. That is going to be assigned to max. Here we go. Max now holds 45. See out max. 45 is the largest value. Continue, and we're done. There's a lot of moving parts to this. Function declaration goes up here. There shouldn't be any space between the function declaration and the documentation. Here's your function prototype, which is part of the function declaration. The function prototype, no semicolon, also precedes the body of the function definition. You can watch this video 50 times if you need to.